You click accept on terms you already know are written against you. You forward the political advertisement you find disgusting, with a joke on top of it. Nobody involved is deceived, and everything runs anyway. Cynical distance feels like the one place ideology cannot reach you. Slavoj Žižek spent a career arguing that the distance is exactly where it lives now. The arrangement is not surviving your knowingness, it is running on it. The next 2 hours take that shelter apart. Part 1. You saw through it and you bought it. Anyway. You are 30 seconds into an advertisement and you have already taken it apart. The demographic, the emotion it is buying, the exact beat where the music comes up under the voice. You could probably name the agency, and on a good day, the campaign brief. Nothing in it is working on you because you can see every wire. You are the least persuadable person in the room, and you have been for years. In 1999, the largest cigarette company on earth started buying television time to talk to parents. Philip Morris. The spots asked parents to talk to their children about not smoking, and they ran for 4 years. Nobody was confused about who was paying. Not the parents watching, not the health departments, and not the 15-year-olds in the next room. Everybody read that message correctly, first time, without help. And the teenagers who saw it most often went on to smoke more. That result should be impossible. It is impossible on one particular theory of how people work. You are carrying that theory right now. You did not choose it, and it is not a stupid theory. It goes in 4 steps. First, people taking part in some arrangement hold a false belief about what they are taking part in. Second, they take part because they hold it. Third, refute the belief, and you have removed the thing their participation was resting on. Fourth, therefore, critique works by producing knowledge, and the knowledge dissolves the practice. You use that theory every time you explain something to somebody in the hope that they will then stop. So find the step the Philip Morris result actually breaks. It is not the first one. People are wrong about the things they participate in constantly, and nothing here says otherwise. The break is in the second step, which says something much stronger than that people are ignorant. It says the ignorance is what holds the arrangement up. Load-bearing. Take load-bearing away and the whole plan collapses, the plan where you explain the thing and the person stops. And not a single fact in a single exposé has to turn out to be false. You can test that word against yourself before anybody shows you a study. Name one arrangement you understand completely and take part in anyway. It will take you about 4 seconds. Whatever your participation is resting on there, it is not a mistaken belief, because you do not have one. Melanie Wakefield and 8 colleagues published it in the American Journal of Public Health in 2006. They took 75 American television markets, covering 78% of the country's viewing households, from 1999 to 2002. They matched the advertising each market received against national school surveys of 103,172 students. Grades 8, 10 and 12. Then they counted how many times each student could have seen a parent-targeted Philip Morris spot in the 4 months before answering. Among the older students, every additional exposure moved 4 separate things: Perceived harm of smoking went down. Approval of smoking went up. Intention to smoke within 5 years went up. And smoking in the past 30 days went up at an odds ratio of 1.12. Small per exposure. And it moved in the direction the campaign was supposed to prevent. The advertisement was telling the truth. A 15-year-old could see who was paying for it and roughly why. And the children who received it most clearly are the ones who smoked the most. Seeing through a message is not the same as being immune to it. Now turn it around, because the same gap opens on the other side of the counter. In 2014, 3 economists circulated a field experiment on eBay's paid search advertising. They switched the advertising off across parts of the United States and watched what happened to sales. For the ads eBay bought on its own brand name, the finding was, in their words, no measurable short-term benefits. People typing eBay into a search box were arriving at eBay anyway. On the other keywords, most of the money reached frequent users who bought regardless, so the average return came out negative. The company had that result from its own economists at experimental strength. The buying continued. Both cases have the same shape, and the shape is the whole argument. The knowing was accurate. The teenagers were right about the cigarette company, and eBay was right about its own numbers. Nothing was hidden, nothing needed unmasking, and nobody was fooled. The practice went on exactly as before. Slavoj Žižek has a sentence for this in the wording his readers pass around. They know very well what they are doing, but still they are doing it. Which is 2 cases. You can build any thesis you like out of 2 cases, and if you are already objecting, you are objecting correctly. Take the first one apart. Teenagers told not to smoke by a cigarette company may simply be reacting against being told. That is a known effect, and it needs no theory of ideology at all. And eBay is a company, not a person, so you can say the marketing department simply had reasons of its own to keep spending. That reading is available, and I am not going to close it off. The second problem is worse because the general literature runs against me. In 2020, Azend, Van Rijmersdal, Bormann and Tarahi pooled 61 papers and 57 datasets on disclosing sponsored content. Labeling the persuasion works. Disclosures lower brand attitudes. They lower credibility, and they lower how the source is judged. They raise recognition of the tactic, and they raise resistance to it. That is the theory you inherited, measured at full meta-analytic strength, coming out the way it predicted. So nobody here is going to tell you that knowing does nothing. Anyone who tells you that is selling you something. Take instead the finding that survives inside that same meta-analysis, because it is stranger. Azend and his colleagues modelled the path the effect travels along. It runs through memory priming and recognizing the disclosure does not drive the evaluation directly. Jung and Heo found the same seam from the other side. How explicit the label was barely mattered. What moved the evaluation was what the viewer already knew about the tactics. And Bormann and Van Rijmersdal, reviewing 21 studies, report the effects further downstream on brand attitude and on purchase intention as inconclusive. So the honest position is narrower than the slogan and more uncomfortable. Recognition and behavior come apart. The label reliably makes you see the persuasion. It does not reliably make you not buy. Seeing through the thing is a real event, and it happens in your head. Its payoff in what you actually do is small, conditional, and sometimes nothing at all. You have been treating a cognitive event as a defense, which leaves two things standing, and neither is comfortable. If the knowledge was never the thing holding the practice up, then something else is. It has been doing that the whole time, and you have not once been watching it. And somebody handed you the idea that knowing would be enough. You have never once checked where that idea came from. So where did it come from? Part 2. The cure nobody checked. You are carrying a conviction you have never taken out and looked at. If people only knew, they would stop. Every campaign you have given money to runs on it. Every documentary you have recommended, every article you have forwarded to somebody who needed to see it. The premise underneath all of them is that the participation is being held up by missing information. Remove the gap in the information and the participation loses its footing. It is worth finding out where that idea came from, because the man it is usually credited to wrote the sentence that refuses it. Which brings us to Marx, because the model is attached to him by an old habit nobody checks. Capital, Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section 4, on the fetishism of commodities. His statement of the mechanism is exact. His words, a definite social relation between men, which takes on, for them, the fantastic form of a relation between things. People deal with each other, and it shows up as a property of objects. And when he describes how the producers stand to what they are doing, the sentence is plain. We are not aware of this, nevertheless we do it. That is the Moore and Aveling translation, and it is the sentence the whole tradition grew out of. Notice what it allows. The model can fail even where every factual claim behind it is true. The knowledge can be correct and still be holding nothing up. Read a little further in the same section, and Marx says what the discovery accomplishes. It marks, he writes, an epoch in the history of the development of the human race. Then comes the clause nobody quotes. It by no means dissipates the mist. The people who made the discovery go on seeing it the old way. The value still looks like a property of the thing, the way weight is. Knowing better does not change how it looks. So the cure has a problem at its origin. Marx wrote that the discovery by no means dissipates the mist. The remedy everyone credits to him is a sentence he explicitly refused. Two smaller corrections travel with that one, and each takes a sentence. False consciousness is not Marx's phrase at all. It is Engels' in a letter to Franz Mehring dated the 14th of July, 1893. He is describing a thinker who works consciously, but with a false consciousness, the real motives unknown to him. Marx's own sentence, the one about not being aware of it and doing it anyway, was about producers and their commodities. That is the whole scope he gave them. Žižek turned them into the formula for ideology as such. That move is his, not Marx's. The model then got the largest test anyone could have designed, and nobody designed it. A century and a half of unmasking. By the 1980s, that unmasking had stopped being specialist knowledge. It had become ambient competence, and it is the competence you arrived here with. Sloterdijk gave that condition its name in 1983, enlightened false consciousness. A modernized, unhappy consciousness on which enlightenment has labored both successfully and in vain. There is a document that shows what that condition looks like from the outside. On the 6th of January 1997, Ernst & Young completed an environmental and labour practice audit of a shoe factory in Vietnam. The plant was Tai Quang Vina, and the client who commissioned the audit and paid for it was Nike. The findings are written in flat accounting language. Toluene in the sole fitting, the ultraviolet rooms, the sinking, attaching and mixing sections exceeded the standard by 6 to 177 times. 128 employees, which the audit puts at 77.57% of those examined, had respiratory disease. The auditors also noted 48 cases where workers were required to work above the maximum working hours. Average basic salary per person was 499,152 dong a month, which the audit itself converts to $45. Then the document escaped, and the full audit reached the open internet, where it has been sitting ever since. This is the document that was supposed to end the arrangement. Every condition the Enlightenment model asks for was met, and met by the buyer's own contractor. The facts were not alleged by an enemy, they were established by a Big Four accounting firm at Nike's expense. Dated, numerate, specific to the second decimal place, and free and public and true. Marx is missed, audited and undissipated. Sloterdijk reads that as ideology failing. The masks are off, the illusions are spent, and what remains is a disenchanted zone where nobody is fooled. Žižek's amendment is a single step. Grant Sloterdijk everything he says about what people know. Then ask what the classical model needs in order to work. If ignorance were the support, the practice should have collapsed when the ignorance went, and it did not collapse. So what the subject knows was never what was holding it up. And there the theory acquires a problem that no further evidence will fix. Line up the three cases it can meet. Somebody sincerely affirms the official story and complies. Ideology confirmed. Somebody denies the story, sees through every part of it, and complies anyway. Ideology confirmed, and confirmed more strongly, because now the distance is doing the work. Somebody denies it and refuses to comply, and that refusal is the licensed role, the tolerated dissident, the safety valve. Ideology confirmed again. Say whatever you like about yourself. Say you believe it. Say you see through it. Say you refuse it. The theory has already written down what each of those means, and every answer means the same thing. A theory that cannot fail is not being careful about the world. It has stopped describing it. That is the first fault. The second is worse, because it is about what happens when you object. The more emphatically you deny you are in it, the better you exemplify it. That is the structure of the worst use of resistance in bad psychoanalysis. Your objection is not answered. It is diagnosed. Three things can be said back. and none of them makes the charge go away. The first is textual. Žižek's own text calls cynical distance just one way, one of many ways, and claims no monopoly. The second is Teresa Kuldova's, writing on fetishism and disavowal in 2019. Disavowal is knowing a thing and carrying on as though you did not. Her point is that some of those cases run through a particular object or ritual that holds the belief for you, and some do not. All of it is ideological. Only the first kind is fetishistic. Part 3 takes that apart. What matters here is that the theory now has 2 boxes rather than 1. It can file a case as fetishistic when it is not, and a theory that can file a case wrongly is a theory you can catch being wrong. That is the minimum you need before an explanation counts as a claim about the world. The third one bites, and it is not a philosophical move at all. In the practical register, the claim forbids something perfectly definite. Awareness on its own will not reduce compliance. That is a prediction about campaigns, and campaigns get measured. Part 1 put the prediction on the stand twice, and it survived twice. The theory still explains far more than it should. In the one register where it makes a testable promise, nothing has yet broken the promise. Which comes back to the documentary you forwarded to somebody who needed to see it. That film was built to close an information gap, and the argument here says the gap was not what was holding the practice up. The awareness component of it was doing no work. Whether the seeing through is a modern condition or a permanent one is genuinely open in the literature, and it changes what you have just been handed. If it is permanent, you have been given a correction to a bad reading of Marx. If it is modern, you have been given a claim about your own century that can be dated and refuted. Set that aside, because one thing stands whichever way it goes. If your knowledge was never the support, something else is doing the work in its place. And it is a strange sort of thing, a state you can produce out loud, on demand, accurately in detail, and which changes nothing you do at 4 p.m. Not ignorance, not lying either, because a liar has a second belief he is keeping back, and there is no second belief here. Psychology has a name for it. So did Freud. They do not mean the same thing. Part 3. The truth you can say out loud and never act on. You have a set of true sentences you can produce on demand. Correct ones with the numbers in them in front of anybody who asks. You are not repressing them, and you have never once doubted them. They are available, articulate, and completely inert. Whatever that is, it is not ignorance, because the knowledge is right there. And it is not hypocrisy, because hypocrisy needs a hidden belief, and you are hiding nothing. Freud hit the same wall in 1927 in a short paper on fetishism. His one tool for a mind refusing something was repression, which buries an idea so it cannot be thought. The buried idea then comes back crooked as a symptom the person cannot explain. But the patient in front of him had buried nothing. He could describe exactly what he had seen, calmly, on request. As a boy, he had seen that his mother's body did not have the penis he had assumed was there. He went on believing it was there anyway. The belief took up residence in a substitute he could point at, a shoe, a fur, a piece of underwear. So Freud needed a second defense, one that leaves the perception standing. The patient retains this belief, but he also gives it up. He had two other cases in the same paper, young men whose fathers had died. Each of them knew perfectly well that his father was dead. One of them, Freud says, oscillated in every situation between two assumptions. On the first, his father was alive and was stopping him from acting. On the second, his father was dead. A colleague, Laforgue, had a word for cases like this, scotomization, meaning a blind spot. Freud refuses it explicitly. Nothing was blanked out. It was only one channel of their mental life, he writes, that had remained ignorant of the death of their fathers. That leaves two different things a mind can do with a fact. Repression buries the idea, and it comes back as a symptom you cannot read. Disavowal removes nothing. The true sentence stays available and stays sayable on any Tuesday you like, which is why disavowal alone of the two is immune to information. There is no hole in the knowledge for a fact to fill. The clearest case of it was not found in a clinic. It comes from Octave Manoni in an essay collected in 1969, and the formula is his rather than Žižek's. Manoni took the case from Don Talajesva's autobiography, Sun Chief. Hopi children are raised believing that the Katsinas are spirits. At initiation, the masked dancers come into the kiva with the masks off. Talajesva describes a great shock. They were not spirits, they were his fathers and his uncles. On the model this whole video has been testing, that is the end of the religion. The truth was delivered brutally in one afternoon by the institution that lived on the falsehood. What happens instead is contained in what the elders say next. The real Katsinas, they tell the children, no longer come to dance in the pueblos as they once did. They come invisibly now. They inhabit the masks on dance days. The refutation gets absorbed and converted into a deeper version of the doctrine. The elders did not fear the unmasking. They scheduled it. The ritual does not survive the truth, it is completed by it. And the boy who was shocked becomes the man behind the mask. The knowledge is acquired and kept, and the masks are men from that day forward. The belief moves into the mask, into the dance day, and into the children who have not been initiated yet. So the grown man can say in complete good faith a sentence with two clauses in it. I know very well that the Katsinas are not spirits, they are my fathers and uncles. But all the same, the Katsinas are there when my fathers and uncles dance masked. Heard once, that sounds like ordinary human inconsistency, and the interesting half is obviously the first one. None of this requires you to accept a word of psychoanalysis. In 2016, in Psychological Review, the psychologist Jane Risen proposed a model she calls acquiescence. Her sentence is flat, and it is the same finding. People can detect an error, but choose not to correct it. She then places a demand on any theory of belief. It must allow that people can recognize in the moment that their belief does not make sense. Her demand on the theory is that it work by decoupling the detection of errors from their correction. Detection and correction come apart. That is the entire quarrel with every campaign ever built on telling you. Now, the strongest objection to all of it, and it does not come from ideology critique. Tamar Gendler, writing in 2008, says None of this needs a split mind or a fetish. Take the glass walkway over the Grand Canyon, 4,000 feet above the floor. Visitors fully believe the glass is safe, since otherwise nobody would step onto it. They freeze anyway and cling and shuffle. Gendler adds Paul Rosin's experiments. Subjects refuse sugar from a bottle they have just labelled cyanide themselves. They refuse fudge that has been shaped like dog feces. She calls the state driving this an A-leaf, an automatic association that runs underneath belief and ignores it. And she blocks the obvious escape route. The subjects in our cases show no reluctance to endorse explicitly the belief with which their behaviour fails to accord. Turned on you, that is a serious deflation. Your inert true sentences might be nothing but belief sitting on top of machinery that never consulted it. Just an animal that flinches at glass and at anything shaped like feces. The honest reply has to concede first. A-leaf is probably the correct account of some of these cases, and vertigo is one of them. But look at what it cannot reach. An A-leaf is automatic and wordless, and nobody is proud of one. Disavowal is articulate and avowed, and the initiated Hopi man will explain the doctrine to you at length. An A-leaf also has no outside, and lives entirely inside one nervous system. The fetish is a public object with a schedule, a mask kept in a room, which is how it gets handed on. And an A-leaf predicts nothing about belief moving into other people, which is the whole Hopi phenomenon. A leaf explains why your knees lock on glass. It does not explain why the elders schedule the unmasking. One more account has to be cleared away here, the analytic one. Alfred Melle's model of self-deception requires the belief the person holds to be false. In these cases, the belief is true, and known to be true, so Melle is describing a different thing. The second attack is worse because it comes from inside. In May 2004, in an essay on Abu Ghraib, Žižek takes a famous Pentagon line. It sorted the world into known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Žižek adds a fourth term to it, the unknown knowns. He then glosses it twice in immediate succession, and the two glosses do not agree. It is precisely the Freudian unconscious, he says, the knowledge which doesn't know itself. A line later, it is the disavowed beliefs and obscene practices we pretend not to know about. An unconscious knowledge is not something you pretend. Pretending takes somebody to do it, and something specific to look away from. That fork decides whether you are on the hook. If the disavowal is unconscious, then the cynic is not culpable, and they know very well is simply false. If it is pretense, then it is bad faith, and the old demand returns with responsibility attached to it. Žižek slides between the two inside one paragraph. He never says which one you are. That slide is where the argument now sits. Jack Black, writing in Theory and Psychology in 2025, says two different mechanisms have been welded together under one name. One of them needs a dupe. Somebody has to still be taken in, and for the initiated Hopi man, that somebody is the uninitiated child. The other needs no dupe at all. The mask does the believing, and nobody has to be fooled. When you produce your true sentences, is there a child in the room, or is there only a mask? The literature has not settled it. So the knowledge stays exactly where it was, and the belief goes into the mask, into the dance day, into the children who have not been initiated yet. Which means the belief has an address, and the address is not behind your eyes. So where does a belief live when it does not live in a head? Part 4. Where your belief actually lives. There is a note in your pocket, and you know exactly what it is. Cotton and linen, printed on both sides, worth a fraction of a penny as an object. The number in your bank account has even less substance than that. It is a row in a database. You could give the correct account of both on request, and you would enjoy giving it. Tomorrow morning you will get up in the dark and sell somebody 8 hours of your life for more of the row. You will arrange your sleep around it, your risk around it, and roughly a third of the years you have left. The demystification is complete. The arrangement has not moved a millimetre. The ordinary picture of belief says this should be impossible. On that picture, a belief is an item you carry, sitting somewhere behind your eyes, and it is what makes the body move. Take the item away and the movement should stop, the way a machine stops when you pull the part out. That picture is reasonable, and it is how you talk about everyone you know. You have already been shown that publishing the truth leaves the arrangement standing, which means the belief was never sitting where the exposure was aimed. So the question is not whether it is there, but where it went. Pascal has an interlocutor who says the awkward thing out loud. The man is not resisting, and he has followed the argument all the way, but the belief will not come. He says he is so made that he cannot believe. Pascal does not argue harder, and instead changes the subject from the mind to the body. Learn of those who have been bound like you, he says. Follow the way by which they began, by acting as if they believed, taking the holy water, having masses said. And then he concedes the price. In Trotter's English translation, the course will deaden your acuteness. He is telling a clever man that the treatment works by making him duller. That is the mechanism stated by its own advocate. Louise Althusser compressed all of that into one line in 1970, and the line is his, not Pascal's. Kneel down, move your lips in prayer, and you will believe. Althusser flags the inversion himself and calls it scandalous. In his version, the kneeling comes first and manufactures the belief. He is arguing from two theses. Ideology represents the imaginary relationship of individuals to their real conditions of existence, and then the one doing the work here. Ideology has a material existence. His gloss is exact. An ideology always exists in an apparatus and its practice or practices. So if you want to know what somebody believes, stop interviewing them. Find out which apparatus their body is enrolled in every weekday. Alfred Sohn Rethel found the same structure with no church anywhere near it. Take the 4 seconds in which you hold a card against a reader, and a cup of coffee becomes yours. For the length of that act, the cup's material life is treated as suspended. What it is made of, how it wears, what it is for those 4 seconds the cup is nothing but a quantity. So is the hour of your life that paid for it. Nobody in the shop entertains that proposition. The transaction entertains it. Sohn Rethel's chapter title carries the whole thesis. Conversion of the real abstraction into the conceptual abstraction. The abstraction gets performed in the act, and only afterwards arrives in anybody's head. Žižek takes one step from there, and it is the step that names the thing. A structure is operating inside what you do, and it organizes the act. It is effective, and it is not available to you while you are performing it. Anything answering that description is, formally, an unconscious, not a hidden room in your mind, a structure in the practice doing what an unconscious does. Which gives us the term the rest of this argument needs, and Žižek calls it the objectively subjective. The definition, the way things actually, objectively seem to you, even if they do not seem that way to you. An appearance with nobody to whom it appears. In 2010, Ted Kapchuk and colleagues published a trial in PLOS One that reads like a joke someone forgot to finish. 80 patients with irritable bowel syndrome were randomized. 37 were given a pill, and 43 were given nothing. The pill group were told in advance, in plain language, what they were getting. Placebo pills made of an inert substance, like sugar pills. There was no deception, and it said so on the bottle. At day 21, the pill group scored 5.0 on the Global Improvement Scale against 3.9. That is a result which turns up by chance about twice in 1,000 runs. Adequate relief, 59% against 35%. Von Wernsdorf and colleagues pooled 11 such trials in scientific reports in 2021. They covered conditions including back pain, cancer fatigue, depression, and hot flushes. Across those trials, the effect size was 0.72, which is a moderate effect. The range it could plausibly sit in runs from 0.39 to 1.05. The trials also disagreed with each other badly. 3/4 of the variation between them is real difference, not chance. Say the caveat out loud, because it is load-bearing. The comparator was no treatment at all, not an active drug. Some of that gap is attention and the experience of being enrolled in something, and the mechanism the authors propose is conditioning and expectancy. Nobody in that literature posits a patient who secretly believes. But look at what the script instructed the providers to say. They told the patients the pills were sugar, and then told them that taking the pills faithfully is critical. They were not asking for belief. They were asking for the right. The charge that this theory cannot fail is still standing, and belief in the practice hands it more to bite on. A theory that reads every possible result as a confirmation has explained nothing, and explaining was this theory's entire warrant. 3 replies exist, and the objection survives all 3. The first is that this was never behaviorism. The claim is narrower than whatever you do reveals what you believe. It is that certain practices have a form which presupposes propositions no participant needs to hold, and that narrower claim forbids things. If enacted belief were only another name for behavior, it could never turn out to be wrong. A redescription cannot be false, but the enacted belief in money does turn out wrong inside the practice and on a schedule. That is what a bank run is. That is what a hyperinflation is. They run on a timetable nobody's avowals control, and usually against them. Central bankers avow solvency loudest at the end. The second reply is shorter, and it is the one that bites. The objection proves too much. Every experiment ever run on the gap between what people say and what they do overrides testimony with behavior. The charge would take all of them down with it. The third move is the honest one, and it costs something. This theory has no business predicting what you personally will do on Thursday. He really believes in the market, said of one named man, is where it stops being checkable, and that attribution should be withdrawn. That also takes back the rule from earlier. Knowing which apparatus a man is enrolled in does not tell you what he will do on Thursday. It tells you what the apparatus presupposes. What survives is impersonal, duller, and much harder to argue with. The practice of exchange presupposes commitments nobody has to hold, and those commitments do causal work. The unit of confirmation is the institution, never the person. One live fight decides how much of your day this reaches. Anselm Jappe argued in Historical Materialism in 2013 that the abstraction happens not at the card reader, but in the work that paid for it. If he is right, this account reaches the till and stops at the door of your job, which leaves the position with a hole in it, and you can feel where. If the belief lives in the practice, then something is carrying out the practice. Rituals do not perform themselves. A person kneels, a clerk stamps the form, a record gets kept somewhere. So the belief has an address, and something is at that address, holding it open on your behalf. You have not been holding it. You have spent your entire adult life explaining why you do not. Which puts the question in the first person, where it belongs. Somebody or something has been believing for you, and it is worth knowing who. Part 5. Somebody else is doing it for you. You have a folder of saved articles you are never going to read. A queue of things you mean to watch. 14 tabs open, 3 of them for a month. And somewhere below the level you would defend out loud, you feel you have dealt with them. Nothing was read, something was discharged. Robert Fowler gave that a name. Interpassivity is delegated passivity in the sense of delegated pleasure or delegated consumption. What gets handed over is the enjoying. His plainest case is a candle in a Catholic church. The believer lights it, stays a few minutes, and leaves. The candle burns on for hours in an empty building. Nobody in that story has to think the candle is praying. Not the believer, not the priest, not the person walking past the door. Gijs van Unen supplies the version you have personally performed. The academic photocopies a chapter and walks out of the library lighter. His description is that the photocopying almost serves as a substitute for the reading rather than simply coming before it. Then he adds the admission that makes it usable, that we learn nothing from mere photocopying. You know this. You have felt the small settling in the chest when the file's saved, and you have never once mistaken it for having read the file. Žižek pushes the same structure until it stops being charming. With a Tibetan prayer wheel, you write out a prayer, put the paper in the drum, and let the drum turn. While it turns, you can think about dinner, or your taxes, or nothing at all. Objectively, you are praying. And his own confession about the video recorder. Owning one meant he watched fewer films, not more. The awareness that the films he loved were stored in his library gave him profound satisfaction, and those are his words for it. You already have the premise from earlier in this video, that belief sits in what a practice does, rather than in what its participants hold. interpassivity says the same thing about feeling. Now put it in a building with a payroll. Mark Fisher describes an office rather than a person. The big other, he writes, could be defined as the consumer of PR and propaganda. It is the virtual figure which is required to believe even when no individual can. Everyone inside the system could see it was shabby and corrupt. So Fisher asks a simple question. Who was it then that did not know? Not the people who were all too aware of its shortcomings, not the administrators who could not but know. The belief was in operation for 40 years. Nobody was holding it. Fowler then takes a step past Žižek, and the step is the whole difference. Žižek tends to say the belief is displaced onto another. Fowler says there is no owner at any point in the chain. Take the photocopier again. You never believed the photocopier could read for you. Nobody believes that. It substitutes for the reading anyway. Not because you hold the belief, but because somebody could hold it. A naive observer who does not exist. The belief has a slot and no occupant. Fowler's phrase for that is an illusion without a subject. The naive believer is a slot in the structure, and nobody has ever been found sitting in it. There is a live fight over what that structure is evidence of. Fowler's verdict is that ownerless illusion is a mark of culture itself. On that reading, your unread folder is a competence you have acquired. Van Onen refuses that and makes it historical. Late modern subjects, he argues, do not delegate passivity in order to be more active. They delegate activity because they can no longer carry it. He calls the condition interactive mental fatigue, the wear that comes from a life of being asked to participate in everything. So put the fight where you can settle it, which is your own week. When the folder goes unread, is that a skill you have gained or a limit you have hit? All of which was built on one object, so look at the object, the sitcom laugh track. You did not laugh. You did not find it funny. At the end of the episode, you are nevertheless relieved, in the way you are relieved after laughing. Žižek's sentence is exactly that. When the other laughs for me, I am free to take a rest. That example has now been tested once, and it came out the wrong way round. Ching Kai, Sinead Chen, Sarah White and Sophie Scott published the study in Current Biology in 2019. Deliberately weak dad jokes, read by a professional comedian, rated on a scale from 1 to 7. 48 neurotypical adults, 24 autistic adults, and a baseline group of 20 who heard no laughter at all. Their finding, in their own words, the presence of laughter enhances how funny people find jokes, and that effect is increased for spontaneous laughter. The laughter made you find the joke funnier yourself, and the more genuine the laugh, the more of it came back to you. The same paper hands over the real history. Laughter tracks were initially introduced because listeners did not always realize that radio comedies were meant to be funny. It went in as a signal, so people would know where the jokes were. The defense runs to 2 lines, and then it has to concede outright. First, a number on a 7-point scale is not the felt obligation to laugh in a room where everybody else already is. The study measured funniness, not pressure. Second, the spontaneous beats posed result supports the larger claim that how funny something feels to you is caused socially rather than privately. Third, and this is the one that costs money, the specific claim was that the machine has the laugh, so you need not have it. On the only evidence anyone has produced, that claim is false. The example Žižek reaches for more than any other does not survive its own experiment. What survives is stranger than what failed. In 2005, Michael Plateau and 9 colleagues ran canned laughter in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology and manipulated exactly one thing: who the laughers were. Participants laughed and smiled more, laughed longer, and rated humorous material more favourably when they heard in-group laughter. They did not do that for out-group laughter, or for no laughter at all. Nobody was told the laughter was more real or less real. The variable was social category. The laugh track works when the people laughing are your kind of people. You can watch that operating in your own hands several times a day. The cookie consent banner. Midas Nouwens and his colleagues at the CHI conference in 2020 scraped the 5 most popular consent platforms across the 10,000 most popular British websites. 680 sites came back in the sample, and only 11.8% met the minimal requirements the authors set from European law. Then they ran a field experiment on the 8 commonest designs. Notification style, meaning whether the thing arrived as a small banner or as a barrier across the whole page, had no effect at all. Removing the opt-out button from the first page increased consent by 22 to 23 percentage points. Putting granular controls on the first page decreased it by 8 to 20. Read that as a test of everything you have just been told. Shouting louder at the user moved nothing. Moving one button moved 1/4 of the population. Nobody believes the banner protects them, and everybody clicks it. The contempt is the condition under which the arrangement works, because a population that believed in the banner would stop and read it. The design was drawn around your knowingness. Consent is legally addressed to a reader who weighs the terms and decides. That reader is the empty slot again. 11.8% compliance is what a slot looks like when nobody has ever sat in it. Which leaves the account short by 1 term. The delegate is not quietly taking the feeling off your hands. On the only experiment anyone has run, the feeling comes back to you, and it comes back larger when the laughers are yours. So the distance you keep is not empty, and it is not free. You are being paid in something. The next question is what and who is covering the cost. Part 6. What the Sneer pays. You screenshot the corporate values slide and send it to the group chat with a caption. 4 people react. Somebody adds a second screenshot from the same deck. Then you close the window, go back to your desk, and hit your targets for the quarter. The standard reading of what just happened comes in 2 versions. The first is hypocrisy, meaning you said one thing and did another. The second is powerlessness, meaning you would have acted if acting had been available. Both are wrong, and the answer that replaces them is worse than either. To get to it, you have to go back to a problem inside the clinic. The concept was built there long before anyone pointed it at a company. Freud's pleasure principle makes one clean prediction. Living things move away from unpleasure and toward relief. The consulting room refused to cooperate. Patients came back week after week to the thing that was damaging them and repeated it on their own initiative. The Stanford Encyclopedia entry on Lacan, written by Adrian Johnston, names this as the phenomenon that pushed Freud into dethroning the pleasure principle in 1920. Repetition compulsion, the spontaneous compulsive repeating of what is painful. So a category was needed for a satisfaction that is not pleasure. And the person having this satisfaction does not experience it as satisfaction at all. The word is jouissance. It is usually left untranslated because the English word enjoyment strips out the sexual register the French carries. That is the gloss, and it is the only one you need. Johnston puts the mechanism in one sentence. The Lacanian drive, he writes, gains its jouissance beyond pleasure precisely through the inhibiting of desire itself. Take that slowly. The satisfaction is in the blocking, not in the arrival. So renunciation is a productive operation. It has an output. That output never attaches to a thing that could satisfy you. Think of the thing you wanted for 2 years, got and found, was not it. Not disappointing, just not it. Whatever that was pointing at is what Johnston calls the object cause of desire. It is not a thing you can acquire. Everything you do acquire is an inadequate substitute for it, and is built to be. Marx's surplus value has the same shape. The capitalist does not lift a pre-existing quantity out of a stock that was sitting there. The magnitude is produced by the form of the relation itself. Be honest about the provenance of that comparison, because it matters for how much weight it can take. In Seminar 16, across 1968 and 1969, Lacan coined surplus enjoyment on the model of Marx's surplus value. That is the standard reconstruction of what he did, not a claim he set out himself. The Stanford entry on Lacan does not discuss it anywhere. This is a live interpretive program, not settled doctrine, and you should hold it that way. With that flagged, take the last step. Your distance is a renunciation. You withhold the belief the slide asks for, and you keep withholding it every day. On the mechanism just described, that withholding does not come to nothing. The blocked investment comes back as the satisfaction of the caption. Your distance is a surplus you extracted, and the distance is the yield. Somebody worked this out and filed it. On 24 February 1982, Inge Telnais filed United States Patent 4248419. Its title is Electronic Gaming Device Utilizing a Random Number Generator for Selecting the Real Stop Positions. It was granted on 15 May 1984 and assigned to International Game Technology on 24 February 1989, 7 years to the day after filing. The specification works an example. One standard type of reel will include 22 positions. The patent maps those onto a circle carrying 44 virtual or randomly programmed positions. 3 of the virtual stops can be given to one symbol. Its odds move from 2 in 22 to 3 in 44, and the physical reel is never touched. Claim 1 puts it as some rotational positions being represented by a plurality of numbers. The player is not deceived about the house edge. Every machine in the room is running one, the players know it, and they play. What was invented, filed, granted and sold is the gap between what the player sees and what the machine does. The reel you are watching became a picture of odds that live somewhere else entirely. and because the mapping is set symbol by symbol, a designer decides how often the jackpot stops one position short of the line. That is the productive operation lodged in a patent office. The thwarting is manufactured at a rate somebody chose and sold by the unit. Now run the same structure through law instead of hardware. In the popular picture, the superego says no, and the trouble it causes you is prohibition. The entry on Žižek in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy says the superego issues a second command alongside the prohibition. Its wording keeps Lacan's French, and in plain English that command is an order to enjoy. A society can put either level in front. Which one it puts in front decides what your guilt is made of. Foreground prohibition, and you are handed an alibi. Failing to enjoy counts as obedience. Put the order to enjoy in front, and the alibi is confiscated. Failing to enjoy is now a fact about you. Guilt does not vanish under permissiveness. It relocates from having transgressed to having underperformed, which is why you can come back from an optimized holiday convinced you failed at relaxing. A superego that only prohibits cannot generate that sentence. You cannot fail at not transgressing. The initiate's line from earlier can now be weighed correctly. I know very well that the Katsinas are not spirits, they are my fathers and uncles. But all the same, the Katsinas are there when they dance masked. First time through, the load-bearing half sounds like the knowledge. Manoni's point runs the other way. The knowing clause is the inert one. The second clause is where the belief was quietly reinstalled, and it is where the yield sits. This gives the account something an account ought to have, a prediction that could embarrass it. On the hypocrisy, reading the mocking is a leak, so a firm that seals it should get more compliance, not less. The surplus reading says the reverse, and says it without qualification. Take away an employee's right to mock the mission statement, and she complies less, not more. The mockery is not a leak in the machine. It is the pay, which is the moment to put the strongest objection at full strength, because it may simply be correct. Everything described so far has an explanation that uses no unobservable terms at all. Rent is due monthly. Health insurance is tied to your employment. Debt is not dischargeable. You need a reference from the person whose slide you are mocking. Savings are thin, and there is no second employer inside commuting distance. Every one of those is measurable by somebody other than you. Arrears, eviction filings, debt to income, employer concentration in a local labour market, notice periods. And together they predict the behaviour completely. Compliance tracks dependence, and it moves when dependence moves. Where exit options rise, compliance falls. A libidinal term added on top of that buys no extra prediction and costs you an unobservable. By parsimony it is idle. Sharpen it and it cuts closer to you. Complaining is what people do when they cannot leave. Irony is cheap dissent and low-risk dissent, which is precisely what remains available once the expensive kinds have been priced out of reach. On this reading, your group chat is not a wage at all. It is the residue of a grievance you are not permitted to file. There is a harder version of the same complaint, and you can run it on yourself in about a minute. Sit across from someone who reads people this way and tell him the truth. The caption was a joke. You felt nothing sending it. You would drop the whole habit tomorrow if the rent were covered. Every one of those sentences confirms him. The denial is the disavowal, and the flatness is what the enjoyment costs you to carry. So make it your question instead of his. What could you say or refuse to say that would make him conclude no enjoyment is at work in you? If the answer is nothing, this is a re-description wearing the clothes of an explanation. The best defence on offer belongs to Samo Tomšič, and it answers one charge while leaving the other standing. The charge, it answers, is that all this smuggles in a permanent human essence. On his reading, jouissance is no such thing. It is a historically specific effect of a particular form of production. That leaves the measurement charge exactly where it was, because a historically specific unobservable is still an unobservable. What is left standing is a short list of people you can see without any theory at all. The wealthy voter against their own material interest. The retiree still defending the firm that discarded him. The person who keeps the practice long after the constraint has lifted. Nobody has counted them, and dependence does not reach any of them. Coercion also needs a bearer. Somebody runs the surveillance, writes the policy, and denies the appeal. Coercion explains the compelled well and explains the enthusiasm of the compellers badly. One reply holds, and it is smaller than you want it to be. The two accounts are not competing at the same level. Coercion says why you cannot leave. Enjoyment says why the inability gets inhabited with irony rather than despair, with a caption rather than sabotage. Say the price of that out loud. It demotes enjoyment from the cause of your compliance to a modulator of the style your compliance takes. That is a narrower claim than the one this part spent its time building, and it is the one the evidence currently supports. Which leaves the arithmetic. If the distance is what makes one person's participation survivable, put 400 such people in one building. One payroll and one set of values that nobody in the lift believes. They stay for years. Some of them love it there. Part 7. The room where nobody believes and nobody leaves. Bring to mind the most cohesive place you have ever worked or served or belonged to. The shift, the unit, the department, the crew that would have covered for you at 3 a.m. Now count the people in it who actually believed the values printed in the induction pack. The number is small. It might be 0. And that was the tightest room you have ever been in. The ordinary explanation of why groups hold together is a good one, and it deserves stating properly before anything is done to it. People stay bound because they want the same thing. A shared purpose gives a member a reason to cover a colleague, work the extra hour, and carry a risk that protects somebody else. That is why every organization writes its purpose down, recites it at induction, and hangs it in the corridor. The account makes a clean prediction, and you can check it. A workforce that privately sneers at its own mission statement should be brittle and slow to close ranks. The room you just remembered falsifies that. So something other than belief is doing the binding, and the argument that names it runs in 6 steps. First, every institution has a public law, the code of conduct, the stated values, the sentences it is willing to be quoted on. Second, that law is available to everybody. A stranger can read it on the train and comply with it perfectly on their first morning. Which means obeying it cannot mark you as one of us, because it does not distinguish a member from a competent outsider. Third, membership therefore has to be marked by something no manual can contain. Every functioning institution runs a second code, unwritten, specifying when the public law is not meant and with whom. Fourth, that second code cannot be written down, because writing it down destroys it. Say a supervisor wants a shift to quietly skip a check. Write that instruction into the minutes and the junior officer has a way out. He can refuse it in the open, and it costs him no more than ordinary insubordination. And the supervisor can no longer say it never happened. So the second code can only be transmitted by being done in company in front of you. Fifth, and this step carries the weight, participation authenticates itself. Taking part produces shared guilt, and shared guilt cannot be faked and cannot be left behind. You cannot say afterwards that you were merely following orders because nothing was ordered, and you cannot report it because the report indicts you. Sixth, membership is proved by breaking the public law in the sanctioned way, which turns the public law inside out. It exists in order to be available for transgression, and it has to be maintained sincerely because a rule nobody upholds is not worth breaking. That is why your room held together. Contempt for the official values was the entrance exam, and every person in there had already passed it. One correction before the evidence, because the whole thing inverts if you miss it. The superego in this argument is not the voice that says do not, it is the pressure that makes transgression a duty. Timothy Breyer states the paradox in one line: you are guilty if you violate the explicit prohibition, and guiltier if you obey it. That is a theory built in a way that invites the charge of being unfalsifiable, so here it is with a survey instrument attached. In 2000, the National Institute of Justice published a national study of police attitudes toward abuse of authority. The Police Foundation ran it, and Mathematica administered it by telephone. 121 departments were sampled, 925 officers completed the survey, and the overall response rate was 81.5%. The public law comes back endorsed. More than 80% said they do not accept the code of silence as an essential part of good policing. And 97.1% said that serious misconduct, of the Rodney King or Abner Louima kind, was extremely rare in their own department. The same officers, on the same instrument, reported the unwritten code as fully operative. 52.4% agreed that it is not unusual for officers to turn a blind eye to a colleague's improper conduct. 61% indicated that officers do not always report even serious criminal violations by other officers. More than 40% agreed that always following the rules is incompatible with getting their job done. That last figure is the double bind reported by the people living inside it without embarrassment. Then the sanction. 2/3 of American police, 67.4%, said that an officer who reports misconduct is likely to be given the cold shoulder by fellow officers. The punishment in that building is not for breaking the rules. It is for keeping them. You already have one document that was supposed to end an arrangement. The audit Nike paid Ernst & Young to run in 1997, the toluene and the respiratory disease, read then as the death certificate of exposure. Publish the facts and nothing moved. Read it again after Enron. Enron's board never violated its code of conduct. It approved 3 Code of Conduct waivers, letting the Chief Financial Officer run private equity funds, sitting on the other side of the company's own deals. The first was presented at a special teleconference board meeting on 28 June 1999. The Senate investigators found that board discussion of the proposal appears to have been minimal, and that the entire meeting lasted 1 hour. The same agenda carried a stock split, an increase in the stock compensation plan, a new corporate jet, and a Middle Eastern investment. The written code had to exist so that there was something to switch off. None of this needs a boardroom, and you have already sat the exam yourself. The day somebody screenshotted the values, slide into the group chat with a caption, laughing entered you into something you cannot now disown. You were there, and you reacted, and there is a record. Refusing to laugh would not have read as neutrality. It would have read as a claim to be better than the people in the chat. And the sender keeps total deniability because it was a joke, so the entire cost of objecting falls on the objector. Nobody gave an order, nothing was written down, and the boundary of the group was enforced anyway. 2 objections now. The first is functionalism. Saying that the transgression sustains power tells you nothing about how it sustains it, and gives no account of institutions that genuinely reform. A reform passes, and the story is that the system absorbed it. A reform fails, and the story is that the system blocked it. A claim that fits both outcomes has not explained either one. The reply available is narrow, and worth having only because it is specific. The mechanism is named, and it is the cold shoulder. Once you have taken part, you cannot get back out of the shared guilt. So the group does not punish you, it stops including you. And the model does specify a reform path, which is to destroy the concealment. What it denies is that reform arrives by enforcing the public law harder. The second objection is about evidence. Breyer concedes it in print himself. Žižek offers few political examples and leans on fictional ones instead. The showcase case for this entire institutional argument is A Few Good Men, a courtroom film about a Marine unit. In it, a lethal order is given with nothing written down, so afterwards there is no record with which to contradict the denial. For a claim about how real organizations work, that is close to disqualifying. A theory of institutions whose flagship evidence is a screenplay has established what a screenwriter found plausible, and nothing else. The only answer that counts here is the one you already heard. 925 serving officers, a national sample, an 81.5% response rate. That is exactly the non-fictional evidence the objection says does not exist. And the claim now has to be stated at its real strength and no higher. Some institutions are cohesive because the people in them genuinely believe the stated values, and nothing here denies it. The argument is about what happens when belief is absent and cohesion survives anyway. Underneath that sits a harder question, and it has not been answered. The eye roll at the values slide, the caption you sent, the line you did not say in the meeting. You want to know which of those cost the institution anything. Žižek's own criterion is about what you do, not what you think. A distance that changes nothing in the ritual is ideological, and a distance that interrupts the ritual is not. That is a real criterion. But the verdict reliably arrives afterwards, once you can already see whether anything moved. Nobody has shown how to run it in advance on the message you are about to send. And the mechanism rests on one explicit premise. The underside binds because it stays unspoken, since the concealment is what makes the deniability work, which makes this argument falsifiable in a way nobody planned for. You have watched more than once somebody with a microphone say the quiet part out loud, on a podium, on camera. On the theory you have just been handed, that should have broken something. So the question is, what happened when it did not? Part 8. When they say the quiet part out loud. Start with the premise that makes exposure a lever at all, because everything here turns on it. Timothy Breyer puts it in one line, in the International Journal of Žižek Studies in 2018. Because the obscene unwritten rules sustain power as long as they remain in the shadows, power can be undermined by making those rules publicly recognized. It says, concealment is the load-bearing variable. Take the concealment away, and the arrangement should come apart on its own. Notice what that premise rules out, because it rules out most of what you were planning to do. Distance cannot be the intervention, since distance is the thing the arrangement runs on. Breyer states the consequence flatly. Often the acts of resistance that we engage in are consistent with the inherent transgression. They ensure we maintain a distance from power, and are therefore precisely those actions that serve to support power. Your eye roll is fuel. So the proposed intervention runs the other way, toward less distance rather than more. The method has a name: over-identification. An ideology is never actually the thing it says it is. There is always a gap. Satire points at that gap from outside. Over-identification does the opposite. It closes the gap by doing exactly what the ideology asks, all of it, including the part it does not admit it wants. Feldner and Viggy state the logic in 2007, in a passage Breyer reprints. The ultimate support of ideology is a nonsensical kernel of enjoyment. So you identify with it completely, they say, inclusive of its concealed underside of obscene enjoyment. Ian Parker gives the sharper version. Over-identification takes the system at its word and plays so close to power that it cannot bear your participation. It is an obsessive identification with the thing, taking it more seriously than it takes itself. Parker is describing a band, Laibach, Ljubljana, the 1980s. Uniforms, martial drumming, totalitarian iconography performed perfectly straight, with no wink anywhere in it. And this is the detail that matters, reported by Parker and quoted by Atena Mendelite in 2013. Until 1986 or 1987, they practiced their role everywhere. In coffee bars, in social spaces, they were always in uniform. It was a highly visible social ritual in a very small Ljubljana. Satire supplies the margin of non-belief the system needs. Over-identification withholds it. That is the whole technical difference, and it is smaller than it sounds. The same logic reframes the person you probably admire most in this area. The line on the whistleblower from 2014 is not that they tell us something we did not know. They render public the unfreedom that underlies the very situation in which we experience ourselves as free. What the whistleblower attacks is not the fact, but the arrangement that depended on nobody saying it. Now, the case, and take the date seriously, because the date is the argument. The essay on Abu Ghraib appeared in These Times on 21st May 2004. It says that in March 2003, Rumsfeld did some amateur philosophizing about the known and the unknown. That is wrong by 13 months. The Department of Defense news briefing was 12 February 2002. That is the briefing with the known unknowns in it. And the question concerned the lack of evidence linking the government of Iraq with the supply of weapons of mass destruction to terrorist groups. So the structure of the justification was tabled in public on camera more than a year before the invasion. The briefing room was full. An absence of evidence converted into a reason to act in front of the assembled press. Nobody leaked it. Nobody had to. You could have read the transcript that week. Enormous numbers of people did. It worked anyway. Žižek then applied the schema to a live election on the record and paid for it. On Channel 4 in 2016, he put it this way: "In every society there is a whole network of unwritten rules, how politics work and how you build consensus." Trump disturbed this. He said he would vote accordingly. In 2016, Damon called him an intellectual charlatan of the worst sort, a verdict Breyer records. And in Breyer's report, Chomsky compared him to somebody endorsing Hitler. Breyer's own reading is the clearest published case for the defense. Liberal democratic capitalism has no positive content of its own to point at. So the candidate who says its unwritten rules out loud is that order made audible rather than an aberration inside it. Its hidden and obscene underside, Breyer writes, is brought out into the open. Then came the part the model has to answer for. The underside went into the open repeatedly, at volume, from podiums. The cruelty was the campaign rather than its whispered supplement. And Trump's coalition did not come apart. It held. That is a failed prediction, and it was this theory's own prediction. The theory said the underside binds because it stays unspoken. Then it was spoken from a podium, and the coalition held. Either the theory failed its own test, or secrecy was never the variable. Deniability was. Take that second horn seriously, because it is a real position. Nothing said from that podium was ever held in a register where it could be pinned down. He was joking. He was being sarcastic. You are the sort of person who takes things literally. On this reading, the disavowal did not end. It moved from the content of the statement to the manner of saying it. The supplement never needed a secret. It needed a way to be denied afterwards. That is an argument about the mechanism, and it should be labelled as one. The research on ironic speech online is not solid enough to put in front of you. The third answer is the coldest of the three. Cynical distance, as the dominant form of ideology, may have been a description of one period, roughly 1980 to 2015. Post-ideological, technocratic, embarrassed to be caught meaning anything sincerely. What followed is avowed enjoyment offered as a positive program, and that may need a different concept entirely. Carrying the old diagnosis forward would then be a retrofit. And the retrofit charge has a dated exhibit. In 2016, this apparatus read Trump as subversive over-identification, dragging the underside into daylight. By 2026, the same apparatus reads him as the fascist liberal, where market freedom and coercive power hold each other up. Ask what could have happened in those 12 years to change the verdict. Victory confirms the thesis. Defeat confirms it. Avowal confirms it, and concealment confirms it. So you are being asked to trust a description that would have arrived whichever way those years had gone. That is the demand you refuse from a politician, from an advertiser, from anybody whose story fits every outcome. The theory that taught you to refuse it is now asking you for the exemption. There is one honest reply, and what makes it a reply rather than a rescue is its date. Breyer printed the rider in 2018, before the outcome was known. Rather than undermining the neoliberal establishment, he wrote of Trump, "His actions may make it even stronger." The warning attached to it is that identification with no distance left in it leads to murderous acting out. Over-identification on that account only wrecks the thing. It is the demolition. What gets built on the cleared ground, nobody in this literature has said. Which is what you're holding the next time you watch somebody drag the quiet part into daylight and call it a victory. The wrecking is the whole of the offer. The sharpest fact about the technique comes from the room rather than from the theory. Parker again threw Mendelite on what happens at Laibach concerts in the West. Leftists and fascists will sometimes find themselves together near the stage, puzzling about what it is that the other finds compatible with their politics. The uniforms decided nothing. Whatever the band withheld, the audience supplied for themselves in both directions at once. So exposure has now failed twice in front of you. Once as an audit nobody disputed, published in full, at the company's own expense. Once as a podium where the reasoning was tabled in advance and nobody could deny it had been said. Which leaves a question that is no longer about the institutions. It is about the person doing the exposing. What exactly is that work paying them? Part 9. The most protected seat in the building. The lever was pulled in public, and the door did not move. Now notice where you're sitting while you hear that. For about 100 minutes, somebody has been doing the seeing through on your behalf. You were handed a memo, an audit, a patent, and a police survey, and you did none of the digging. You will finish this better armed and in exactly the same place. You already have the name for the structure. It is the laugh track, which arrived in Part 5 as a curiosity about television. Here it stops being about television. The laughing is done for you, and so is the seeing, and both of them leave your Monday alone. The strongest statement of that problem came from inside the practice, from a man who had built a career on it. In 2004, Bruno Latour published an essay asking why critique had run out of steam. What set him off was a leaked strategy memo, quoted in a New York Times editorial in March 2003. The advice to campaigners was to keep the science looking unfinished. You need to continue to make the lack of scientific certainty a primary issue. Latour replied with recognition, "I too made it a primary issue." His indictment of his own field is the part worth memorizing. Entire doctoral programs, he wrote, are still running to make sure that good American kids learn the hard way that facts are made up. Meanwhile, dangerous extremists use the very same argument of social construction to destroy hard-won evidence that could save our lives. Then the domestic version, which is smaller and worse. His neighbour in the Bourbonnais village where he lived looked down on him as hopelessly naive. The reason was that Latour believed the United States had been attacked by terrorists. The posture of superiority survived intact, while its content flipped. Conspiracy theory, he says, is an absurd deformation of his own arguments. But the trademark is still burnt into the steel, made in critical land. Latour also named the trick that keeps the position habitable, and it is the reason you have never had to audit yourself. You can be, at once, and without even sensing any contradiction, three people. An anti-fetishist for everything you do not believe in, which is mostly religion, popular culture, art and politics. An unrepentant positivist for all the sciences you do believe in. And a perfectly healthy, sturdy realist for whatever you really cherish, which might, of course, be criticism itself. The two lists never cross. You take apart the campaign launch, the sponsored post, and the press conference. You do not take apart your own taking apart, because that one sits on the list nobody inspects. The next question is what the seat does to everyone who is not sitting in it. Rancière compressed the answer into one sentence. Where one searches for the hidden beneath the apparent, a position of mastery is established. Gert Biester laid out the premises that sentence is attacking, and they are the ones you have been running on. 1. Power works on your consciousness in a way that stops you seeing how power works on your consciousness. 2. Freedom therefore requires that somebody expose it. 3. That somebody has to stand outside the working in science or in philosophy. 4. Emancipation is therefore something done to you from outside by an intervention. Biester then shows three things that structure cannot shake off. The first is dependency, since the knowledge that frees you is knowledge you cannot reach, so with no intervention there is no emancipation. The second is that the emancipator needs you to be the one who could not see it. His standing depends on your not having had it, so the position turns out people who used to be fooled, and never anyone who does the freeing. The third is distrust of your experience. The logic says you cannot trust what you see or feel, and need someone else to tell you what you're really going through. Read those back as a job description, and they describe stable employment. Sedgwick caught the tell inside the practice itself. Paranoia, for all its vaunted suspicion, acts as though its work would be accomplished if only it could finally get its story truly known. The work is never accomplished, and the story is already known, which is why the practice never has to stop. It also needs the dupes. A project defined as against something must keep locating that something in order to keep tearing it down. Robin Sellicott states the same fault as a plain inconsistency. The critic explains other people's beliefs as effects of structures. The critic expects her own claims to be engaged as arguments rather than as symptoms. Felsky's line closes it. It is hard to see on what grounds that same respect can be withheld from others. That is the asymmetry you are running when you explain a colleague's enthusiasm and defend your own reasoning. For about 100 minutes you have been demonstrating to yourself that you are not fooled. There is a measured version of what that demonstration buys, and it comes with its own weakness attached. In 2015, Blanken, van der Ven and Zeelenberg pooled 91 studies and roughly 7,400 participants on moral licensing. Having just demonstrated that you are good makes the next lapse easier, at an effect size of 0.31. That is small. The same authors report that published work carries larger licensing effects than unpublished work, and that far bigger samples are needed. Say that out loud, because saying it is the whole difference between scrutiny and the blanket suspicion that all studies are fake. On the small effect that survives, producing the correct account of the ad is itself the demonstration that buys the next lapse. The second number is about the posture rather than the license. People consistently believe that mass communication works on other people more than it works on them. Paul, Salwin and Dupin pooled 32 studies and 121 effect sizes in 2000 and put the self-other gap at about 0.5. Sun, Pan and Shen found it robust across 60 papers 8 years later. The asymmetry cannot be true of everybody at once. Somebody answering that survey is wrong about their own immunity, and nobody thinks it is them. You clicked on this because you are the person who sees through things. So here is the finding about that person. Olga Stavrova and Daniel Ehlebrecht published it in 2019, working across roughly 200,000 people in 30 countries. Cynical individuals generally do worse on cognitive ability and academic competency tasks. The competent are cynical selectively, endorsing cynicism only if it was warranted in a given environment. The less competent endorse it everywhere. People believe cynics are smarter, and cynics score worse. Blanket suspicion is not a sign of intelligence. It is what gets used instead of it. Now the strongest reply, and it is strong enough to take the seat back. Everything above assumes that critique means suspicion, aimed outward at other people. Nicholas Holm points out that this is a recent capture of the word. In Kant, Adorno and Foucault, critique is less a practice of suspicion than a sustained operation of doubt radiating in all directions. Suspicion points away from the person holding it. Doubt, in Holmes' phrase, is both more narcissistic and more democratic. It has scope to take in everyone, even especially the critic. The trap built above closes on suspicion. Doubt that turns around and includes the doubter walks straight out of it. If that distinction holds, this whole part has been attacking a degraded version and calling it the thing. There is a second objection, and the editors who published this debate raised it against their own issue. The argument arrives while Florida legislates against critical theory by name. A sentence like "something is wrong with critique" is a sentence with a use, and the use is not yours. Being convenient to them does not make it false. It does mean you have no say in where it lands. Felsky's answer to the second objection is one line. Post-critique presumes a knowledge of critique and works through the limits of a tradition rather than rejecting it. Then there is what happened to her, which is the cleanest evidence in this part that the trap is real. She published a book arguing that critique reduces individuals to symptoms of social forces and does not tolerate rivals. The harsher responses in her words mirrored with uncanny exactitude the rhetorical moves that were analysed in the pages of the book. She was cast as an unwitting or all-too-witting pawn of neoliberal capitalism. The reply performed the thesis. Where the exit lies is your problem now, and nobody in that argument is going to hand it to you. Holmes' version is the one that reaches you, because it turns the practice around on the person running it. Doubt that includes the doubter points the same instrument at the hand holding it. You have been running suspicion for about 100 minutes, on an industry, on a memo, on your own compliance. The question is whether it has ever once landed on you. Doubting your politics is easy because it costs you nothing you would miss. Doubting the seeing through means asking what it has been buying you while you sat here. Nobody in the literature can settle that, and nobody was ever going to. It is the only part of this that was ever yours to decide. So, the seeing through is a seat, with a wage attached and a measurable bias built in. But every argument in this video has granted you one thing. It has assumed you at least know what you're doing when you comply. There is a worse possibility, and it comes from a greengrocer in Prague. The compliance may not need a belief at all. What it needs is a dignified description. Part 10. The sign you put up and do not believe. There is something you display that you do not believe. The line in your email signature. The badge on the lanyard, the training module you finish by clicking through it at speed, the post you did not want to write and wrote. If anyone asked, you would say it means nothing, and you would be telling the truth. You did not consent to it, and you did not resist it. You displayed it. In 1978, a Czech playwright wrote the essay explaining why that honest answer is wrong, and he did it without a word of psychoanalysis. Václav Havel opens The Power of the Powerless with a shop. The manager of a fruit and vegetable store puts a placard in his window among the onions and the carrots. It reads, "Workers of the world, unite." Havel asks the obvious question and then refuses the obvious answer. The man is making no claim at all about the international proletariat. In Havel's words, that poster was delivered to our greengrocer from the enterprise headquarters along with the onions and carrots. He put them all in the window, simply because it has been done that way for years. Because everyone does it, and because that is the way it has to be. So the sign carries a message, just not the one printed on it. Havel translates, "I, the greengrocer XY, live here, and I know what I must do. I behave in the manner expected of me. I can be depended upon and am beyond reproach. I am obedient, and therefore I have the right to be left in peace." That is a signal sent to whoever inspects shop windows, and both parties read it correctly. The words about the workers of the world are only the carrier, and nobody involved attends to them. Now the thought experiment Havel builds out of it. Suppose headquarters had sent down a different placard, reading, "I am afraid, and therefore unquestioningly obedient." The greengrocer would not be indifferent to that one, even though the statement would reflect the truth. He would be embarrassed and ashamed to put so unequivocal a statement of his own degradation in his window. Hold the two placards side by side. The first he displays without reading it, the second he would refuse, and only the second is accurate. The slogan is not there to persuade anybody. It is there so that the obedient man never has to describe his own obedience. Havel's own conclusion is stated in one line. The sign helps the greengrocer to conceal from himself the low foundations of his obedience, at the same time concealing the low foundations of power. It hides them behind the facade of something high, and that something is ideology. His definition follows, and it is the least mystical definition of ideology anybody has written. Ideology offers human beings the illusion of an identity, of dignity and of morality, while making it easier for them to part with them. You have the dignity of not believing the values slide on the wall. That dignity is exactly what makes the slide cheap to leave up. And the requirement Havel names is behavioral, never mental. Individuals need not believe all these mystifications, but they must behave as though they did. They need not accept the lie. It is enough, Havel says, for them to have accepted their life with it and in it. By that fact alone, individuals confirm the system, fulfill the system, make the system, are the system. Which raises the question of who the audience is, given that nobody reads the posters. Havel's answer is that they are unread and perfectly visible. They form part of the panorama of everyday life, and people are very aware of that panorama as a whole. Walk the street with him. An hour before the greengrocer opens, a woman in an office down the same street hangs her own slogan in the corridor, also without thinking. She will never read his. He will never read hers. Nobody in your building reads the poster by the lift either, and everybody could tell you what is on it. Havel says the mutual indifference is only an illusion, because by exhibiting their slogans, each compels the other to accept the rules of the game. Each helps the other to be obedient. So you are not on one side of this. The system works on you, and the system works through you. In Havel's words, that line runs de facto through each person. Everyone, he writes, in his own way is both a victim and a supporter of the system. Your poster is what makes hers look normal, and hers is what makes yours look normal. Then Havel makes his greengrocer stop. He stops voting in elections he knows are a farce. He begins to say what he really thinks at political meetings. The price is itemized, and Havel does not soften a single item. Demotion to the warehouse, no holiday in Bulgaria, and the children's place at university put in doubt. The hardest detail is who administers the punishment. Most of those who apply the sanctions, Havel writes, will not act from any authentic inner conviction, but simply under pressure from conditions. The same conditions that once got him to hang the sign. And the gesture works anyway, because he has said that the emperor is naked. Now go back over that last paragraph and notice what is carrying it. Fear. Havel's greengrocer complies because there is a warehouse and a university place, and the account of knowing distance you have been given so far needs neither. It changes what each account predicts will happen next, and the two predictions point in opposite directions. Timur Kuran published the case in World Politics in 1991, under the title Now Out of Never. The revolution of 1989, he notes, surprised leaders, participants, victims and observers alike. His explanation separates what a person privately prefers from what that person says in public. Citizens suppressed their antipathies to the status quo, and the suppression misled everybody about the prospects of a successful uprising. That is what conferred, in his phrase, an aura of invincibility on governments. Each person carries a private threshold, a point at which the falling social cost of dissent makes speaking cheaper than lying. Nobody can see anybody else's threshold because everybody is falsifying. So a small shock tips a few people, that tipping lowers the cost for the next few, and the cascade arrives unforecast. Damon Centola, Rob Willer and Michael Macy modeled this in the American Journal of Sociology in 2005. Their version adds a cruelty. In the simulation, people do not only comply with a norm they privately reject, they enforce it on others to demonstrate that their own compliance is sincere. That is Havel's warehouse manager, formalized. And their strangest finding is that cascades of support for a highly unpopular norm cannot occur in fully connected networks. The norm survives only where people cannot see far enough to discover how many others already agree with them. Now set the two mechanisms beside each other because the difference between them is exact. Under preference falsification, something is hidden, and it is hidden by fear. Under disavowal, nothing is hidden at all. The knowledge gets said out loud in the group chat for laughs, saying it is part of what makes it bearable. So the predictions split. Fear predicts brittleness, a structure that looks invincible right up to the month it is gone. Comfort predicts durability, because contempt, spoken freely, bleeds off the pressure that would otherwise build. In Curran's model, the pressure is the gap between what you think and what you say. Say it, and the gap closes without anything else having to change. This is where the honest result costs the cynicism account something. 1989 is Curran's case, and it is a strong one. The survival of consumer capitalism under universal, articulate, meme-fluent contempt is the other case. The likeliest reading is that both accounts are right about different rooms. Preference falsification governs wherever sanctions are real, and knowing distance governs wherever participation is voluntary. Where somebody can actually punish you, Curran's mechanism needs no enjoyment and no psychoanalysis, and it explained a revolution nobody predicted. The simpler explanation wins that case. Which leaves the theory a narrower job than it usually claims for itself. Nobody's sanctioned you for buying the thing you mocked last week. There is no warehouse waiting, no holiday withdrawn, no university place in doubt. Havel's greengrocer had a way out, and he had it precisely because fear is the thing holding him. Stop being afraid where other people can see you, and the thresholds around you start to fall. You are not afraid. Nobody is threatening your child's place at university over a cookie banner or a values slide. So either your way out is a different way out from his, or the diagnosis has lost its subject and is describing a country that no longer exists. Part 11. Maybe nobody is watching anymore. Nobody delivered a sign to your window this morning. There is no slogan on your wall, and nobody is coming to check whether you put it up. You set your own targets. You decide when the working day ends, which in practice means you decide that it does not. The thing you lose arguments with is a number on a screen, a completion rate, a reply time, a chart that was green last week. Everything you have been told so far assumes there is a command out there. Your distance was distance from that command. There is no such command anywhere in your day. So you may have been listening to a very careful description of somebody else's century. Byung-Chul Han has built the strongest version of that objection, and it deserves to be put at full strength. His claim is that the society organized around prohibition is over. That society ran on the should not, the wall, the border, the rule, the officer at the door. It produced madmen and criminals as its characteristic casualties. What replaced it is organized around the can. You are free, you are unlimited, you are a project rather than a subject, and the ceiling is your own capacity. In that arrangement, the exploiter and the exploited are the same person. Freedom itself becomes the form the coercion takes. And the signature pathologies are no longer madness and criminality, but depression and burnout, which is what happens to somebody who cannot rebel against himself. Now, make the challenge explicit as an argument. Premise 1. Distance is always distance from something. There has to be a rule you follow with your hands and refuse in your head. Premise 2. In an achievement society, the command is self-issued, and the person who wrote it is you. Premise 3. There is therefore no gap between you and the demand, and no space for the distance to occupy. Premise 4. Auto-exploitation is more efficient than exploitation, because it arrives feeling like freedom. So Han's sentence about the present is that there is nobody left to disobey. The reply available here is real, and it is narrower than it first looks. A command you issue yourself is not evidence that the other has gone. It is the superego working at full power. An internalized command punishes harder than an external one, because there is nowhere to file the appeal. It also still runs on enjoyment. You enjoy your productivity and you enjoy your exhaustion as proof that the productivity was real. On this reading, Han has described the phenomenology correctly and rediscovered the superego, then named it an epoch. Ibrahim Berkan Karataş, writing in Constellations in 2025, flags this exact contested point. Does Han's positive compulsion really differ from the internalization Foucault already described, or is the account circular? Karataş adds a sharper charge. A near-annual publication cycle of short, digestible, highly shareable theoretical fragments arguably performs the acceleration it was written to diagnose. Han's worry is that the command has moved inside you. The opposite worry is that the command has dissolved into traffic, and there is nothing solid enough left to be cynical about. That is Jodie Dean's ground. Her term is communicative capitalism, the era in which communication itself is central to production and accumulation. Her mechanism is one sentence. Messages are contributions to circulating content, not actions to elicit responses. The circulation value of a contribution overtakes the use value of the message. What matters is the likelihood that a thing gets shared, rather than what it meant. Take the screenshot of the values slide you sent to the group chat. It was a wage, and it was an entrance exam. On Dean's account, it was also just a contribution. 4 reactions, and the timeline moved on. The argument you made yesterday now has a circulation value that has quietly overtaken its meaning. Dean's second claim is the load-bearing one, and she credits it to Žižek by name. Her instance is exact. There is no big other who can tell us whether the virus is real, masks work, vaccines are safe, and who won the election. That is what she means by a decline of symbolic efficiency, and she argues digital communication produced it. Symbols that point one way in one field point somewhere else in another. On that reading, silos and bubbles are a mass adaptive response to the absence of shared meaning rather than an individual failing. Then she writes the sentence that indicts this video, and it should be read out without flinching. Dissent is just more content, whether cogently argued or the daily outrage. Then she asks what the point of critique is if it will not, if it cannot, register. Her answer is that communicative capitalism undermines critiques conditions of possibility. The reply is narrow and honest. She takes the phrase decline of symbolic efficiency from Žižek and says so. The big other's non-existence was always the premise, never the refutation. And her own account still requires somebody who enjoys the loop enough to stay in it. So the genuine disagreement is smaller and more interesting than a knockdown. Is the unit of ideology the individual's stance or the infrastructure's throughput? Now the harder threat, because those two are rivals, and this one is a contradiction. Start with sincerity and refuse to settle it from the armchair. Bullock, Gerber, Hill and Huber paid people small sums for correct answers on political facts, and paid them for admitting they did not know. The partisan gaps sharply diminished. Pryor, Sud and Kanner in 2015 ran 2 national surveys with monetary incentives and accuracy appeals, and both significantly reduced partisan differences in economic perceptions. Their reading is that many partisans treat a factual question as an opinion question unless something motivates them otherwise. Schaffner and Lux put 2 inauguration crowd photographs in front of respondents where the true answer is visible on the table. They found clear evidence of expressive responding, strongest among the most politically interested. A belief you will sell for $1 was doing a different job than believing. Then Adam Berinsky cuts the other way, and he cuts hard. Across experiments built specifically to strip expressive responding out of survey answers, he finds the incidence of it is very small. People largely mean what they tell the pollster. The literature is genuinely split, and the split is the philosophical question wearing a lab coat. And there is a worse case than a split literature. In 2014, 4 researchers published a study in the British Journal of Social Psychology. Alexander Haslam, Stephen Riker, Catherine Millard and Rachel MacDonald, working from Box 44 of Yale's Milgram archive. That box holds what participants said afterwards about having taken part in the obedience experiments. The authors report that what stands out in those responses is happiness at having participated. Their model is engaged followership. Willingness to do an unpleasant thing depends on identifying with a collective goal, and leaders cultivate that goal by making it seem virtuous rather than vicious. The authors say this contradicts Milgram's own account, in which the subject sinks into a passive agentic state. The best documented case of ordinary people doing something terrible ends with them writing in to say they were glad to have helped. Not ironic distance, enthusiasm. The reply on the theory's behalf exists, and you should hear it before deciding. The man in that room is not enthusiastic about the shocks. He is enthusiastic about science, about usefulness, about the enterprise. The knowledge of what his hand is doing sits next to that enthusiasm without ever touching it. He believes in the experiment. He does not have to believe in the shocks. Believing in the thing while not caring what the thing does is exactly the divided state this argument has been describing all along. I am not going to award that point. Whether it is a rescue or an unfalsifiable dodge is the same question this argument has been carrying from the start. And notice what the defence costs. The claim was never that nobody sincerely believes anything. It was that ideology no longer requires sincere belief in order to keep running, which lets the true believer and the sneering non-believer occupy the same slot. That is a real nuance, and it saves the thesis from a cheap loss. It also means the thesis is now compatible with the enthusiast, the cynic, the exhausted self-manager, and the timeline. The more it accommodates, the less it forbids. So here is where you actually stand. Han says there is no command left to disobey. Dean says there is no shared meaning left to be cynical about. A cardboard box in a Yale archive says the engine was never distance in the first place. None of the three has been refuted, and all three have been absorbed, which is starting to look less like strength and more like a symptom. Which forces the question that has been deferred since the audit changed nothing. What would the world look like if this were false? And is there anywhere at all to stand while you ask it? Part 12. There is no room you can step out of. You have been waiting this whole time for the place to stand. The room outside the room. Somewhere you could say, with no caption and no joke, that you are not in it. That waiting is not a detour off your condition. It is your condition. Seeing through something is the belief that there is a somewhere to see it from. And that waiting makes perfect sense. It is what almost everyone means by the word ideology. Something sits between you and the world, like a screen or a coat of paint on a window. Critique scrapes it off, and what is underneath is how things actually are. The explainer thread you sent last month has that shape built into it. The shape only works if there is an undistorted world waiting on the other side. Take a word 10 people have arranged their lives around. The market. Ask them what it names, and you get 10 answers. One means the price of everything, found by people bidding against each other. One means a natural order that punishes interference. One means the few firms large enough to set the price themselves. Those three cannot all be describing the same thing. Ask again next year, and the answers have moved. The coordination does not wobble. They vote the same way, they read the same page every morning, they arrange their careers around it. What those 10 share was never a definition. What they share is the gesture of pointing at the same word. There is a name for what you just watched. In 1983, Ernesto Laclau published 4 pages called The Impossibility of Society, and they take the other side away. His first step you already accept. Social identities are relational rather than intrinsic. Worker, landlord, customer, citizen. None of those names anything on its own, including the ones you use for yourself. Structuralism got that far, then hardened those relations into a fixed system. His second step is that no such system ever closes. Any structural system, he writes, is always surrounded by an excess of meaning which it is unable to master. Think of society as a single object, the thing that would explain all its own parts. Laclau's claim is that no such object exists. Not that we have not built it yet. It cannot be built. Those 10 answers are what its absence looks like from inside. Then the step people skip. A field with nothing fixed in it is unlivable. Laclau is blunt about this. A discourse in which meaning cannot possibly be fixed, he writes, is nothing else but the discourse of the psychotic. So every order is an attempt at closure, and every attempt is precarious, and it holds only while the precariousness goes unnoticed. That gives him his inversion, which runs backwards from everything the word was taught to mean. The ideological, he writes, consists in the non-recognition of the precarious character of any positivity. It is the will to totality of any totalizing discourse, the demand that one account be the whole account. And since no social life is possible without some fixation of meaning, the ideological must be seen as constitutive of the social. So stepping outside ideology is an incoherent request, because the undistorted world the picture requires is not there for you to reach. Communities cohere at the level of the signifier, not at the level of what it is supposed to mean. Which answers something from the start of this video. Why proving the values statement empty changes nothing. You can prove the content of the word empty on Monday, and the identification is intact on Tuesday. You were arguing about what the word stands for. Nobody was ever there. This could slide into mysticism very easily, and one sentence stops it. Hegel had already written it, and compressed to its point it runs like this. Behind the curtain supposed to conceal the inner world, there is nothing to be seen unless we go behind it ourselves. Lacan's name for that, nothing is the real. Go back to the 10 people and the word market. Their 10 answers do not just differ, they contradict, and no 11th answer settles it. That point, where every description of what the word names runs out, is the real. It is a place inside the world you already have, where the descriptions stop working. You get at it by pinpointing those places one at a time. That is mapping. So ideology covers over the fact that reality has a hole in it. There is a political reason to care about this, and Laclos supplies it himself. The undistorted standpoint is a job, and somebody has to be given it. In the Marxist case, that was the party, holding a class's objective interests, while the actual workers held something else. The gap between what people said they wanted and what they were said to really want kept widening. What filled it, in Laclos' words, was an enlightened despotism of intellectuals and bureaucrats who spoke in the name of the masses. They explained to those masses their true interests and imposed increasingly totalitarian forms of control. So whoever holds the outside position acquires authority over everyone else's account of themselves. That is what your friend hears when you tell them what they really wanted from the thing they just bought. Now the objection, and it should worry you more than it worries the people making this argument. If the ideological is constitutive of the social, then everything social is ideological. A word that picks out everything picks out nothing. Critique needs a contrast to work. Calling a policy ideological has to mean something a rival description would not be, and here nothing ever qualifies. The word stops being a charge and becomes a report on the weather. Laclos records the pressure himself. The frameworks that made the concept intelligible, he writes, have broken up, and the concept should consequently be eliminated. He refuses the elimination without refuting the case for it. Behind that sits the older problem the whole tradition carries. Critique is supposed to start inside the contradictions people actually live, without importing standards from nowhere. The Stanford Encyclopedia entry on critical theory puts the question exactly. How can critique maintain normative force without establishing independent normative criteria? The best answer from inside this position tests the form of a claim rather than its content. There is no undistorted reality to measure against, so the measure becomes whether a discourse avows its own contingency or hides it. A constitution that prints its own amendment procedure passes that test. One claiming to express the will of a people for all time does not. The values statement, whose author you can name, is less ideological than the one arriving as simply true. Then turn that test on the position holding it. That point where the descriptions run out is offered as the one thing no fixation ever absorbs, the limit that keeps every order precarious. Ask what keeps the real precarious, and inside this framework, nothing does. It is the fixed point that makes contingency thinkable, and it is spared the contestation demanded of everything else, which is the move you object to when anybody else makes it. A theory holding that all positivity is precarious has one positivity it never puts at risk. And there is a second cost. If the antagonism at the bottom of every order can never be settled, critique has nowhere to go but back over itself. That is contemplation with a better vocabulary. Which is where the sentence people fire at you as the knockout blow needs its second half. Lacan titled his seminar of 1973 and 1974 Les non-dupes errent. The non-duped err. It gets used to end arguments, and it is usually aimed at somebody exactly like you. In one session of that seminar, he is reported to have added the next clause himself. That does not mean that the dupes do not err. The non-duped err, and the duped err too. There is no safe side. Sincerity is not the cure for irony. It is a different way of wandering. No outside, no vantage point, and a diagnosis that has now survived 3 rivals without defeating any of them. It has told you that your distance is what makes the participation bearable, and that being bearable was budgeted for. Which leaves one question, and it is the one you came here wanting answered. What, if anything, are you supposed to do now? Part 13. What you are allowed to stop claiming. So there is no room to step out of. Then you want the move. The thing to do on Monday, the one thing that is not simply one more thing to see through. That demand is completely fair, and it is the demand this argument is least able to meet. So here is the ledger, item by item. 3 exits have been proposed in this literature, and each one gets scored against the record rather than against how good it sounds. Start with the exit that refuses distance, instead of adding more, the one you already have from Leibach. What you do not yet have is its score. Ian Parker, writing about the concerts in the West, describes leftists and fascists finding themselves together near the stage, each puzzled over what the other found compatible with their politics. Atina Mendelite wrote the harder verdict in the journal Crisis in 2013. The act does not dissolve the fantasy. It hosts 2 opposite ones at once and lets you pick which one you're here for, which is a menu. A stance you select is a stance with a price, and selecting is the market's own move. And whatever changes meaning depending on who is standing near the stage is not an exit from anything. Then the act, with its premises laid out so you can grade them yourself. 1. No order was authorized into existence by its own laws. The court that writes the rules was not itself set up by any rule it wrote. 2. So any move that satisfies the order's own criteria can only improve the order, never replace it. 3. So a move that does replace it breaks the old criteria by definition. Its justification can only arrive later, issued by the order it installed. Take that third premise seriously, and it costs you the whole thing. If an act cannot be evaluated before it happens, no criterion separates an emancipatory one from a catastrophe. Have the courage to act becomes formally identical to have the courage to do something drastic. That follows from the retroactive structure its own defenders describe. The third exit is the withdrawal, the step off the field where yes and no are the only available answers. No source consulted here exhibits a single case where that subtraction changed one coordinate of anything. Simon Critchley pressed exactly this in 2008, and the charge stands unanswered in the published exchange. On one hand, he writes, "The only authentic stance to take in dark times is to do nothing, to refuse all commitment, to be paralyzed like Bartleby. On the other hand, there is a dream of a cataclysmic, purifying violence of the sovereign ethical deed. Those are the two options you have actually been alternating between. Do nothing and call it integrity, or wait for the thing that would settle it." Then the reply. Žižek answers that the ethics of the infinite demand is itself a wish for a master, which Critchley calls very odd coming from a Lacanian. Somebody has to occupy the position of master for the demand to be made to. When Lacan was heckled by Leninist students at Vincennes in December 1969, he told them this: "What you aspire to as revolutionaries is a master. You will get one." Do not award Critchley the round either. His own position is in no better shape, and the case against it has never been answered either. The people who marched against the Iraq War registered their dissent and saved their beautiful souls, and the government pointed at the marches as evidence of the very freedom the invasion claimed to be defending. Nothing in the causal chain was touched. That is the laugh track again. It is now an account of every gesture you have counted as participation: the march, the share, the signature, the standing order. 2 programs, neither demonstrated. A standoff. Be precise about what that standoff is a fact about. The description has survived every exit proposed for it. That is a finding about the state of the argument, not a finding about the world, and it does not say no exit exists. Nobody has demonstrated one, and nobody has shown there is none. This genre specializes in announcing that there is no exit when all anybody has actually shown is that nobody has found one. The argument has, though, identified one lever, and it is not attitudinal. Go back to the consent pop-up. Notification style, meaning how loudly you were warned, had no effect at all. Removing the opt-out button from the first page moved consent by 22 to 23 percentage points. Awareness moved nothing. Geometry moved everything. If consent is a function of where a button sits, the lever is institutional and material, a default, a rule, an arrangement. That is an argument for changing defaults, and it cuts against the conclusion you were probably about to draw, which is that nothing can be done. What this theory earns you is a different target. Sit with the same paper's other number because it inverts an object you have carried since the beginning. Across the top 10,000 British websites, only 11.8% of those consent pop-ups met the minimal requirements of European law. The compliance document is itself the violation. Set that beside the Ernst & Young audit of Tai Kwang Wiener, 1997. Toluene at up to 177 times the standard commissioned by Nike, published in full, and nothing moved. The illegal banner nobody reads carries the only handle in this entire argument that measurably moved anybody. Then the shape of the difficulty in one dated case. In September 2000, Alberto Corda settled an action in the London High Court. He took the 1960 portrait of Che Guevara that ended up on every wall you have ever seen it on. He had been happy for it to be used worldwide on students' bedroom walls without a penny in royalties. What he sued over was its use in a 1999 advertisement for Smirnoff spicy vodka. The defendants were the Picture Library Rex Features and the advertising agency Low Lintus. Damages were described as substantial, and he directed the profits to Cuban children's charities. Free on the wall, litigated on the bottle. The only instrument available for defending an anti-capitalist icon was English commercial law. Which brings the sentence that does all of this work for people who have never read a word of the theory. We know they are lying, we know they are lying, but they keep lying anyway, and we keep pretending to believe them. It is attributed everywhere to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. In October 2023, quote, investigator went looking and found no substantive support for that attribution at all. The earliest complete modern version they could locate is Elena Gorokova's memoir, A Mountain of Crumbs, from 2010. Written in English for an American publisher, and possibly repeating something she once heard, which means the true author is nobody. The ancestor is older. Mara Ellis Ryan, The Woman of the Twilight, 1913, Chapter 18. We pretend to believe them, and they pretend to be deceived by our pretense, but no one is fooled. She was describing American social life. It was never a report from behind a wall. It was a description of this room. So here is what is entailed, stated exactly, and nothing past it. Cynical distance has turned out to be compatible with everything the arrangement needs from you. So the distance is not producing the exemption you have been treating it as producing. Seeing through it is not a credential, and it is not a down payment on some action you will take later. What the person who sees through everything can no longer claim is that the seeing is itself a stance. The initiate sentence survives whole. You may keep the words I know very well. What you may no longer do is enter them on the ledger as something you did. Everything past that is the part nobody in this literature has established. Inventing one here would be this video doing the thing it has spent 2 hours describing. The vigilance is not going to stop. It is most of how you think, and there is no version of you that watches an advertisement innocently now. You are not going to be able to put it down. What stops is the invoice. You no longer get to bill the seeing as an act. The question you walked in with was, what do I see? The question you leave with is what moved.